Greetings everyone, my name is Soul and today I am here to talk about one of the best shonen anime of all time, and that is Yu Yu Hakusho. This is your father's boomer anime, let me tell you. I was introduced to Yu Yu Hakusho back when it was on Toonami. It was like the show that stood on equal grounds to Dragon Ball Z. It just wasn't as popular as Dragon Ball Z, and I realized that even back in the day. And my little baby Dragon Ball Z brain couldn't really comprehend Yu Yu Hakusho at the time. It was a lot faster, it didn't have giant filler arcs, it wasn't what I was used to, and it was much darker. The themes in this show go from anywhere of this nihilistic, is humanity even worth saving, to more personal relationships between Yusuke and his alcoholic mother. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. This is going to be a long video. I would grab your popcorn, grab some snackies. We're going to get right into it, okay? It's going to be get hype. So, I was introduced to Yu Yu Hakusho again kind of when it was on Toonami, and I had a PS2 game that was the Dark Brotherhood tournament, and most of what I remembered of this show before I rewatched it was the Dark Tournament arc. The Dark Tournament arc is one of those most infamous arcs in anime. It's the original tournament. I know Dragon Ball and My Hero Academia, all these other shows that have done big tournament arcs, they just don't feel the same as the Dark Tournament. That kind of feels like the textbook tournament. When I think of tournaments, I think of the Dark Brotherhood, which is also funny because when I think of another trope of anime character gets hit by a truck and dies, I think of this show. Even though that's happened in so many other anime, I just feel like this show is the one that kind of nails what that concept is on its head. And that's where we begin. I want to talk about each arc individually, and then we'll go into the characters and all the other things I love about this show. And it was weird because I didn't know how to feel about this show watching it again because I hadn't seen it in at least a decade. And my brother was hyping it up you gotta go back and watch Yu Yu Hakusho, and I'd already gone back and watched a couple of these other animes and finally felt right. And I think I should have watched it a different type of way because there's usually an anime that I'll watch one episode a day right before I go to bed. I'll watch it in bed on a smaller TV, and I feel making these really good shows, I watched Mob Psycho 100 that way, I watched this show this way, which if you watch an episode a day, it's 112 episodes. Sometimes when I got into a good arc, when I got into the Sensui, when I got into the Sensui arc, or even certain big moments of the Dark Brotherhood tournament, did I say the Dark Brotherhood tournament? Certain parts of the Dark Tournament arc that get really hype, and those episodes, you just can't turn them off. I was addicted to the show during certain moments. And then it has these chill periods where the characters are kind of just doing their own thing in between these big battles or what have you. It's really good pacing, and in some ways you could argue the show has terrible pacing, but again, we'll get into that as we go arc by arc. The first arc is the Spirit Detective saga, and it's kind of you're watching a big shonen arc and fast forward, because it goes kind of how Naruto goes from Naruto to Naruto Shippuden. Dragon Ball goes from Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z. And One Piece has this whole other fucking thing, but that's neither here nor there. Yu Yu Hakusho, the beginning, is kind of a fun adventure, ghost story. Basically, young boy Yusuke Urameshi gets hit by a car, and we never hear from him again. No, he becomes a spirit detective. So basically, he is getting into these murder mystery ghost stories and helping those who have passed on kind of do whatever they need done. And think of it the same way you think of the spirit world in Dragon Ball. It's very similar to that in a lot of regards. Imagine if King Kai had a hot female assistant, and he's make Goku go back to Earth and clean up some shit. It's that essentially, and that's a fun story. There's a lot of fun adventures in there, but Yusuke doesn't really even know how to harness his spirit energy. And before all this, he dies, of course. And Yu Yu Hakusho has probably I don't want to say one of the best first episodes out of any shonen, but probably the most productive episode, if that makes sense. Because again, we know everything about this character by the first episode. And when you think of a lot of these shows, the first episode isn't very indicative of what is to come. When you watch Dragon Ball episode 1, by the time you reach Dragon Ball Super, completely different show. The first episode of Naruto doesn't even reference Sasuke, and that's like, by the end of the show, like, it's completely different, right? In Yu Yu Hakusho, the first episode, we, like, if anything, Naruto, I'll compliment it in the fact that it introduced who Naruto was, and we were able to establish Naruto, the main character. In the first episode of Yu Yu Hakusho, we establish the main character and, like, half of the cast, and the main objective. We immediately establish who is Yusuke Urameshi. He is a troubled boy with a alcoholic mother. Like, I don't want to just... He's from a troubled home. And he's not going to school. He's a punk kid. Everyone's, like, a little bit, like, standoffish to him. Like, oh, you're a Urameshi boy. And then you're introduced to Kuwabara, his rival slash friend. And you're introduced to Keiko, his, like, love interest, who is, like, trying to help him, but, like, wants him to, like, do it himself. And you're immediately thrown into this world, and it's immediately, bam, Yusuke's dead. He's a spirit detective, and the way everyone reacts to his death, that is how you truly are introduced to these characters. And that's how you really establish every single relationship. The way Keiko reacts to his death, you're like, oh, this puts into context who Keiko is to him. This puts in, and when Kuwabara storms in there, he's like, how could you die on me, man? You weren't supposed... It should have been me, whatever he says. That establishes the relationship between him and Kuwabara. Because at first you're like, oh, they're rivals, they hate each other. And then you see the way he reacts to his death, and you're like, oh, there's like another layer to this. And that's established all again in the first episode. And after that, it kind of just becomes this fun little adventure show. They get in these like little troubling situations with these minor demons. These, I guess you would call them like D-class demons. And Yusuke's kind of just getting the concepts of the world. And then you get into some more fun stuff. You learn like Kuwabara has spirit, like sixth sense. And like, it's not really established why. He's just that special. And he kind of, that's how he is connected to this universe till the end of the story. He's just randomly able to harness all the spirit energy and or demon energy, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of concepts that they're trying to shove in there really fast. And again, I didn't pick up on any of this when I was a child. I was kind of just like, oh, yeah, fun fights. Like, oh, like now that I was able to rewatch it, I was able to fully put into perspective all of these different things. And I didn't know what happened after the Dark Tournament. I didn't even know how the Dark Tournament ended. So being able to go back and watch it nowadays, it was a very fun experience, but that first arc, again, even the animation is completely different. It's more goofy. It's more fun. That's why I kind of compare it to early Dragon Ball. And then when you get into, once you start, you're introducing Hiei, you're introducing Kurama, which are probably some of the best, like, side characters, like, best team-up gang characters in any shonen. I love, like, the main, like, 4 or 5 characters, if you include Genkai, or even, like, Keiko and Botan, like, even good old Koenma. They're all part of this, like, really knit close cast, and it's great. I hate how I end everything with just like, oh, it's great. But anyway, after you're introduced to Hiei and Kurama, you slowly dip your toes into the Dark Tournament arc. They've already teamed up. They already are introduced to the Toguro brothers. It establishes... It's a great establishment for the Dark Tournament. And once you get there, it's a very long arc. There's a lot of fights, and a lot of the fights feel just kind of like, almost like UFC fights. It's just kind of like these matches go in any way, in any... Like, the rules constantly are just being flipped on their ass. You're constantly being inundated with, like, the higher-ups of this tournament, the people who own the tournament, like, making these weird decisions, and Toguro brothers, like, They can control everything, and it's all leading up to this big fight between Yusuke and Toguro. You know that's how it's gonna end. You know it's gonna be those characters, but like along the way, you don't know. Hey, maybe Kuwabara could die right now. Like, who knows? And they tease a lot of different things, but during this time, it's a great like way for all the characters to get these huge power-ups, because Hiei has this whole arc with like the dragon and the darkness flame, and Kuwabara is out here just getting his ass kicked. He's like the one like really taking he's the tank of the team, but like he always is able to come back, and he's able to pull out shit out of his ass. All the characters are able to pull shit out their ass. Not Kuwabara. Kurama gets this huge power up, and I'm gonna talk about each of the characters in depth later, but Kurama gets this huge power up, but like the power ups like that they pull out their ass, the way that they're able to do this, it resonates for the rest of the story. Hiei doesn't have like the most character development of any character, but like just how he adapts in fights and how much stronger he gets, it's an interesting, and Hiei is cool enough that it doesn't matter. Kurama, same thing, he gets this huge power-up thing, and his character, this is spoilers by the way, he turns into the fox spirit, and he's that fox spirit for the rest of the show. And he kind of got it by coincidence, but it works out perfectly. And the Dark Tournament arc, like, Jesus Christ, like, it was like watching my childhood finish. Because there's all these characters like the Yo-Yo Kid and the Wind guy, with the weird fucking Irish accent, but we'll get into dubs later. There's the knife guy. I remember really resonating for some reason as a kid with Yusuke and the drunken guy. And for some reason I was able to comprehend that as a kid. Like that's who this character is. He's just a drunk who gets in these bar knuckle fights and like has this weird knife game, and I understood completely that like Yusuke was kind of meeting him at his level and playing his game because he liked it just as much as he did, and they were having this grand old time punching the shit out of each other. And he stays around for the rest of the show, so a lot of these characters that you don't think matter do end up mattering. And they kind of pick and choose which ones they're going to use for the rest of the show, and a lot of the other ones, you know, you kind of know like if it's going to be a job, if they're just going to get jobbed out or whatever. But they're interesting fights. Like Hiei might just ruin a guy. They might hype up a guy and then Hiei is going to kill him in like 2 seconds, but it's still going to be a very hype fight nonetheless. And again, it's everything happening around the show too is interesting. Like if you watch a lot of these shows, these shonen shows, the side characters are usually just hyping them up in the background, just talking endlessly. In Yu Yu Hakusho, Botan, Hiei's sister, all of them are doing things while the main characters are fighting. And let's say like Keiko's at the tournament and she's trying to get up close, or she's like literally trying to fight a demon or something, whatever's going on in the background, it matters to that character, and they're not just like, you know, strangling a TV screen for like 20 episodes. They're doing things and actually have insightful or interesting inputs. Like I'm interested in Kuwabara's sister for some reason. I'm like interested. She has this huge arc. Kuwabara's sister has this huge important impact to the plot, or at least one of the characters, and like no other show is gonna do that except Yu Yu Hakusho. In a Dark Tournament arc, the way Toguro is like one of the greatest villains of all time. In anything. I love Toguro. And the way that they showed him in like the PS2 game that I played as this like unbelievable like brute guy you could never beat, that's how I always thought of the character. And watching him now like develop a heart, his entire backstory with Genkai, like if you were gonna just write any old backstory, that's probably like one of the best ones you could do. I love like the student-teacher dynamics and stories. Like Yusuke and Genkai had amazing chemistry. Like their banter was perfect. They were both smartasses to each other. They both have chips on their shoulders and attitude, but like once you chop off every chip away, there's like this like really intense relationship there. And obviously Yusuke didn't have any role model, anything in his life, and Genkai takes that spot, but she's just as abusive as any other relationship Yusuke had at this point. And he runs away from actual relationships with Keiko because, again, he doesn't know how to express that. He doesn't, like, until like the literally the end of the show, he just doesn't rest. He will not give in to that soft side of him. But again, we'll get into that when we talk about characters. Again, all I can talk about is Toguro and the other main characters. The elder Toguro brothers. This is what I'm talking about. Like, the characters I'll compare it to like a Naruto or like even a My Hero in that sense, because each character has their own little quirks. It's not so much just, I'm big strong man, you big strong man, let's find out who big stronger men. It's kind of like, oh, what are you gonna do about this rando hacks ability? I'm a weird demon who can like remove the molecules out of your brain to make you think. Deal with it. And then Hiei's like, I'm so much faster than you that you can't, like, I'm making shit up obviously, but like, it's who can pull shit out of their ass out of the other, and somehow they make that work. Like Kurama, I think in a fight, just they were in Demon World and he's like, oh, I just happen to have seeds planted everywhere in Demon World, and he's just like, yep, you gotcha. I bet you weren't ready for me to kill you because you happen to be standing on the entire plane of existence. Gotcha. Stuff like that happens all the time. But again, a lot of it's interesting. Like, seeing Hiei conquer the Dragon of the Darkness Flame is more interesting than any other, like, character just trying to get their next power up. Like, you see, like, they have, like, just this 1 minute where he's, like, on a rock just being tortured by it, but you can see he's trying to master it. Little bits like that make it all the much more worth it when they actually do get that level up, when they do conquer whatever it is. And just seeing, like, because obviously the big emotional part of that arc was Yusuke and Grand Kai with Genkai. They're in that cave for so long, and constantly they're not at the tournament, and you're just like, where are you? Everything going on with Yusuke and his spirit pet, that the little thing, like, that was again one of those things as a kid I was able to understand. Like, oh, this like creature feels bad because he feels bad. And God, like, it was graphic. Like, did I watch that as a kid? Did I watch Yusuke be tortured in that cave? That literally was like watching Jesus Christ get crucified, but like he just happened to be doing it in the cave he died at. You just saw characters get tortured, and the animators, again, that first arc where it's like the spirit detective stuff, it's really goofy and campy and fun, and the show like kind of retains that vibe throughout the show because the characters are quirky and the OP is really fun. But like these battles, the way they're animated, like characters will have like these really dark shading, and like the way it's able to capture just like colors and light and this really old school style of animation. We don't see shit like this anymore, and this is the kind of stuff I miss. There's so much better work in this show than most of shonen like titles. Characters aren't just standing there for 30 seconds like jittering like like it's not just like a picture that they're moving up and down like there's so much fluidity. Seeing Hiei use Dragon of Darkness Flame, Akihiko Shimbo, that motherfucker like is able to animate like this style that is not literally in any other part of the show. The characters are moving so wildly in contrast to anything else you'll see in the show, and they do stuff like that for a lot of these big moments. When Yusuke fights Toguro, they have like some crazy stuff in that fight. Again, Yusuke in the cave being tortured, like he's just literally writhing in pain, and his body is like whichever color it feels like, and he's just like, you can see his body flaring to a pulp. That is really intense stuff in the show. And you see stuff like a lot of really cool costumes. Like each of the characters, like Yusuke, you look at him and he's like just a punk teenager kid off the street, like in a fight. That's how he's dressed, like just pants, a tucked in white t-shirt, and that's it. That's what he wears during fights. Kurama's still, he's wearing some form of school uniform, but he's still wearing school uniform. Same thing with Kuwabara. Hiei is the only like demonly interesting character who's not like doing that kind of thing. But it like Botan, from her outfit, from when she's dressing casually, I guess I should save all this stuff for the characters. But the outfits in the show are amazing. But the reason I was saying that is because like that one demon character, I forget his name, like Bui or something. The guy who has like this crazy suit of armor, and they have this whole gimmick around his armor. And you like have to just slowly break it apart, and it just turns into whatever it wants to. He's like, now I'm wearing my steel, my iron, my whatever type of armor. This show got really wild with its concepts. But again, I think that's kind of like where the show's downfall was, because every single arc, it's like, how do we make this fight crazy? And how does this character win? And how does this character become stronger? And it does that so many times. By the end of the show, you're like, what is even happening? Like, characters are strong enough to destroy the planet by the end of the show. And they're able to, I could punch this ocean at you if I wanted to, or stuff like that. Crazy stuff like that is happening. But at the same time, like, where we started was the adventure fun show, not completely related to, like, what we're doing now. It's an interesting growth. Like, the Dark Tournament arc is kind of like that soft middle ground where the characters aren't too strong and doing too crazy of things, but obviously they're punching each other through buildings and stuff. It's good shonen stuff. After the Dark Tournament arc, which has this amazing finish, even the elder Dagoro brother who survives, like, that I was okay with. Usually, like, this show plays with a lot of character deaths that, like, don't really matter. That was one instance, like, keeping him alive kind of felt right. And the way he's used later, it kind of, like, once it's in perspective, you're like, okay, they did all right. And that character is great anyway. Just the idea of, like, him able to move his body parts within his body so he can't, like, take vital hits. Incredibly interesting. Incredibly, like, the animation on that is disturbing. After that arc is the Sensui arc, where immediately the beginning of the arc, where we're just kind of introduced to the idea of psychics and telekinesis and all this stuff, and like, oh, it's like almost like wizardry, like, I have a barrier around this building, you're helpless inside my barrier. All of that I didn't really care for. I'm not gonna be honest. I'm gonna be honest, because after they raise the stakes so high, and even Yusuke gets really, really upset by this. He's like, even after all this fucking bullshit training, you just throw in these random guys. There's like 3 of them. It's like, yeah, you're in my barrier. You're helpless. It's like, oh, this whole time there's just all these other people who could be way stronger. And one thing I'm really upset about is that they bring back Genkai. I understand that this world introduces the idea of death as like this much more simpler idea, and Yusuke's dead, and like, who really cares? It never really mattered, but like when Genkai dies, and the way that they're able to use that for the Dagoro fight, and the way Yusuke reacts to it, it's emotional. And once you kind of just throw all that out the window and like, hey, I'm back, guys. And the way it's so poorly explained, like, I think Koenma was just kind of casually like, oh, like, I brought you back. You didn't know? Fuck you. It was just so underwhelming after everything we went through to get there. Don't get me wrong, I love Genkai. I don't think they should have brought her back, though. I think that was like one of, if anything, one of the major red flags. That and the ending and a couple other little small spots that stopped this from being like a 10 out of 10 anime for me. It's not a 10 out of 10, spoiler. I do understand where a lot of people come from, where they say this is their favorite show, their favorite anime, or at least their favorite like big action shonen. I get all that because it is kind of like a perfect shonen in a lot of regards, but we'll get to that when we reach the end. God, I hate that I'm moving right now. My walls are so naked and I just hear the echo and I'm not used to it. It's I waited so long to do this video. I watched Yu Yu Hakusho like a number of weeks ago at this point, and finally when I move, I get the gumption to fully do this. Cause normally I want to do a whole fandom pop video where I go like really in depth and good editing. But then it's like there's so much to this show that I have to talk about. Like, how do you make a Yu Yu Hakusho and not talk about Sensui? How do you not talk about, like, again, how great that first episode was at introducing characters? And then I want to talk about Toguro. Again, you have to talk about so many things. It's like that would have been like an hour-long fandom pop video, and it's just not gonna happen. If anything, a podcast type format is like one in my wheelhouse of acceptable content that I can actually put out. It was either this or no show or no video about Yu Yu Hakusho, and which is sad because in a world where I have perfect time, I would love to pump out a bunch of videos about Yu Yu Hakusho because again, this show has a lot of great content. Like, I know I watch a lot of like anime content where it's like up to date like theories and fan fictions and all these other things about Dragon Ball and Naruto, but Yu Yu Hakusho is perfectly up there with those shows for me on terms of content and quality, and it just needs that fan base, and it deserves that fan base. That's why I'm here. I'm in the trenches. But anyway, after we kind of get through this whole arc with the psychics and all this, we're then introduced to Sensui, who's trying to open a hole in demon world so demons flood the earth, and he wants to just wipe out humans. He has seen the terror. He's seen like this it's literally a VHS tape with the worst, like, it's the ultimate snuff film. It has all of humanity's downsides. They half-ass explain why this thing exists, but it's the darkest content on the dark web possible. And Sensui has watched this like religiously, and he's trying to just wipe out humanity he's seen the terrible things that they even do to demons. Because at this point, like, we understand that, hey, demons can be more than just like a random ghoul looking thing. It can actually be like a normal person like Hiei or whatever. But we're not really introduced to like, hey, humans might be torturing these things and doing whatever else, and they are, and you find that out, and then it gets a little bit more complicated, and even Yusuke is like kind of siding with Sensui at points where he's like, yeah, humans are fucked up, and yeah, there's all this and that, and then like the fight takes a little bit more personal route where he's like, I just want to fucking beat you. I don't really give a shit what happens to humanity. Like, Yusuke has kind of like this god complex by the end of the show, and it's almost earned, almost. But he's still like a punk asshole kid at the end of the day, so it's not like completely outside of his wheelhouse. But anyway, Sensui, before the fight even happens, they set him up perfectly because he kind of rises each of these other minor characters up to fight the cast. And he's kind of doing his own thing. And then the fight happens, and then suddenly you're like introduced to the fact like, oh, Sensui has like a multi-personality disorder, and he has not even my final form on top of my final form on top of my final form. And I didn't even mention he's a former spirit detective. He's literally the guy before Yusuke. And just the fact that Yusuke, all the potential he had, Sensui has the exact same potential. He's been doing the exact same thing, but for much longer. And he's, it's literally like when the more experienced person at your job, like when you have to like take over their spot, like, you literally have to fill the shoes of someone who's been doing this much longer than you and just is naturally much better. It's like that, but on a shonen level. And not only that, he has so many crazy power-ups. When he's able to just take that like giant key thing and then he turns into a fucking soccer ball, like a soccer ball shotgun. I love that move. And even when he's powering up, a lot of the forms are kind of ugly. That's kind of where the fight loses me for a little bit, because then you find out like basically Yusuke dies, even though he's already dead, which is like this whole other matter. But he dies again, but then he gets resurrected as his like ancestral father. You find out of nowhere. If anything, this is one of the things that they should have put little seeds in, but they didn't. And I think the original author just kind of, again, pulled this out of his ass, but he happens to be the long descendant of a demon, and he happens to be the strongest demon ever, and this is part of why Yusuke is so strong. I'm sick of anime using this card, that it's like, oh, the reason you're even this strong to begin with is because you just happen to be born in the right bloodline. You happen to have the strongest grandpappy in all of the lands. Good job. I don't like that. Especially since, like, the heart of the story was that, like, Yusuke was just this kid from this troubled home life, and he was able to, like, punch and kick his, like, own, I don't want to say, like, responsibility. He's able to punch and kick his own, like, little niche for himself. His own little job and little, I'm the spirit detective. This is what I do. I protect, but I also get in trouble, and I don't go to school. And there was the right balance of that, but, like, suddenly and after he becomes Demon Lord Dad and defeats Sensui, he just goes back to school, and it's, like, so unnatural at this point. He's like, what the fuck am I even doing here anymore? Like, it is such an out-of-body experience going to school and just being like, hi, Keiko, I'm Demon Lord motherfucker over here. It's a lot character conflict in his head during this part. But finishing off on the Sensui arc, again, the show is continuously doing a lot of experimental animation. All of these fights are amazing, but the way they end the Sensui arc, again, his Demon Lord grandfather basically takes over his body. The blood in him is so powerful, it takes over his body, and that's what kills Sensui. And Yusuke has this whole thing about killing, which is a little... I don't understand that conflict when he's, like, at the same time so, like, whatever about, like, mass genocide. He's like, I can kill off all the humans. And then later you find out his grandfather, his great ancestral, his ancestor, he eats humans, and he's kind of just like whatever about it. He's like, you gotta do what you gotta do. The human, it's whatever. We eat animals. But the way they kill him off and end the fight is kind of BS. Because by the time you get to that point in the fight, it's so personal. These guys are just like every single punch. There's nothing left in the tank emotionally or physically, and then it's like, hack ability. I don't even get the satisfaction of ending the fight. And then they use that, to propel the next arc, but the way the next arc ends the entire show, and it's kind of like, if anything, for a lot of people, it ended at the Dark Brotherhood, or the Dark Tournament arc. I keep saying Dark Brotherhood. The Dark Tournament arc. And then the Sensui arc is like the people who actually like love the show, and like a lot of people, that's kind of where it ends. And then there's like this other arc at the end that's kind of like its own thing. That's like the Dragon Ball GT part of the show. It still has a lot of great content though. But for a lot of people, it should have ended at the Sensui arc. So the reason that they ended it that way just hurts so much more. But Sensui is just as good as Toguro. When I said Toguro was like one of the best anime or anything villains ever, the same goes for Sensui. Sensui, just like, there's this little moment when I learned, like, Sensui, like, says, I could have ended humanity. I think Yusuke even asked him that. He's like, if you're so powerful and you can end humanity, why don't you just fucking do it? Or he says, why don't you just destroy the world? Because that's what he can do. Just end it all. And then he's like, I don't want to, like, he's like, I like animals. I like nature. I like all these other things. I just hate humanity. I just want to get rid of humans off of the world. And once I realized that put the character into so much more perspective. The fact that he's like, I like trees and bunny rabbits, so no, I refuse. He's like, he actually feels so much more justified than 90% of shonen villains. I love Sensui. His design is really cool. You lose a little bit of him once you start doing that like multi-personality thing, because I think they were able to have like one really good backstory for him, and then the personality thing was like this little added layer, and it gave him bullshit power-ups, and he gets a fucking gun for a hand at one point. There's like that very feminine one. It's a very interesting turn. But even his design, like I really wish I would have watched the Sensui arc as a kid, because I really feel like that would have made me love the show so much more, because I think Sensui is a character that I really could have got behind back then, and I still do. I love that dude. He is like nihilism incarnate in this, like, but not like in the like cringy like who even cares, like he's just like, who even cares? Like he's just so matter of fact and so confident in his nihilism. Amazing arc. After that arc, we get into the just Demon World arc, I guess you could call it. It ends in another tournament, but it's really just Demon World. And it starts off good. What is that woman you're introduced to? I think it's like an older spirit detective, like maybe the first one or something like that. It's a female, and she's she somehow leads into him going to Demon World, and he doesn't know if he'll come back. Like that's another one of these things where like you really don't think he gives a shit about Keiko, because again he's running from his problems, and like it's to the point where he doesn't know if he'll come back if he goes to Demon World, and he goes anyway. And like you just kind of don't really buy that he can't be happy. Like he needs more of that fight. He needs more of like what made him so happy during those fights. Like I get where he's coming from, but at the same time I'm just like what do you have to achieve? Like I have to fuck up my grandpa because he did that to me during that fight. Like who cares, Yusuke? But you understand where he's coming from to an extent. It's shonen, whatever. You go to Demon World, and again the animation's completely different, at least as far as the backgrounds go, because the backgrounds for the show are on point. Even when you're in the Dark Tournament arc and you're just seeing the exact same background, they're able to animate that so interestingly. The way that they're able to use Demon World, they're allowed to go off the fucking rails. Demon World is like the Digimon digital world in terms of like all these different landscapes, and you can do whatever you want. But if all of those were like in a metal album cover, it's great. And then you're introduced to Yusuke's like ultimate like ancestor, who's still alive, but like he's gonna die because he refuses to eat humans now, even though that part's dumb. There's a lot of dumb shit to come. And then Hihei and Kurama come back, but basically because Demon World is divided into 3 parts, they all have 3 different leaders. It's like Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like there's these 3 lands, they're fighting for all eternity. Hihei ends up like training with like one of the guys. Kurama's with this other guy, and they all have different motivations and reasons for being there. But the way it all ends is Yusuke uses all of this as setup. Once his grandfather dies and he's like the leader of his area, they're like, oh well, how about we just have a giant tournament decide who gets control of Demon World, and we'll just have this tournament every so often, and that's how they end the show. I like that motivation. I like the way they're kind of just having this happy-go-lucky tournament, even though it's the most evil, dark tournament thing ever. I like all that. That's fun. But if you didn't know already, the guy I forget his name, who wrote Yu Yu Hakusho, he decides, oh, that's it. I can't write this anymore. And it was so stressful, and I don't blame him for it, because I know a lot of people can't handle like the hectic schedule and the hectic lifestyle that writing a full-time manga brings. You hear a lot of horror stories. The way these people dedicate themselves to these crafts are amazing, and they produce some of the best stories ever, in my opinion. But like, again, it's one of those human condition kind of things. Art is made by people in the real world, and sometimes the real world just sucks, and he just tapped out. He tapped out, and I can't blame him for it, but we are left with a somewhat unsatisfactory ending. The tournament is in fast forward mode. You're introduced to a lot of characters, and they try to throw little things in here. There's this guy with the son, and then it doesn't matter. Yusuke loses. You see all the fights that were, because originally you're having like these giant, like I think the Senzui and Toguro fights were like 7 or 8 episodes. All the fights, there's like 2 fights in an episode now. Even like if there was like a minor character who's like part 1 of 4 guys we gotta fight, back in the day they would have got a whole episode. And now it's just kind of like Hiei versus the strongest guy, the 4th strongest guy in all Demon World, 1 episode. Maybe even a second fight. And then it just kind of ends. Everybody comes back from Demon World, and Kuwabara, like, this show is able to juggle the amount of characters perfectly. Like Hiei and Kurama, unlike most shonen sidekicks who just kind of like relegate to the background, these characters are constantly getting better, constantly developing for the most part, and by the end of the show, they're on equal footing with Yusuke for like the entire show. And the fact that like Kuwabara, who already was straggling, if anybody was, the fact that he just kind of gets completely left behind. Like if you were to do a Yu Yu Hakusho ranking, like of who's strongest, like Kuwabara would have been like within the top 10 at one point, and then suddenly he's like not even in A tier, he's like a B tier like character. That's a little bit upsetting. And then the show ends. They do have a good send-off. They do have like a happy little episode where they kind of wrap a decent bow on top of it. Yusuke, he like the author, just kind of taps out from fighting. He retires, and he decides, I'm gonna live happily with Keiko. I'm gonna be a human now. Throw in the towel, hang up the boots. They're on the beach just having this fun time. Everybody's happy, and that's how the show ends. 112 episodes in, the same exact intro. I'm not gonna lie, that OP is pretty nostalgic. It's like the mixing is like a little like it's one of those things, like I feel weird watching this on like a more HD TV and like stuff like this, when all this old anime kind of feels like it needs that bubble TV. It needs like the shitty TV audio, so like the original audio that's kind of shitty doesn't sound as like unnatural. But then again, I haven't done that in so long. Maybe it'd just be horrible. Maybe this new format is like the best I got. Like, stuff ages after a while. It has to. Yu Yu Hakusho came out in 1992. It is decades old at this point. Decades. But again, that OP slaps with nostalgia despite everything. And then they have 6 EDs, which was weird because back then a lot of shonen shows just gets 1 opening for all the 100+ episodes. Nowadays, like every 20 some episodes will get a new opening, and a part of me didn't like that, like for shows like Naruto, because it's like we don't really get attached to one of them because I was binging the show too fast. But a lot of shows I now wish had more than 1 opening, because it's like the same thing every time. You are bound to fast forward by the 30th time. Be honest, you're not going to watch Yu Yu Hakusho opening 112 times when you don't have to. But the English version I really like. The Japanese version, I just don't have that nostalgic for it, but not a fan of the Japanese opening as much. And that goes, the whole show I watched dubbed. It's one of the most highly coveted dub shows. This was back when Funimation like really was getting their feet down and dirty, and they had like a different mantra back then, because it's like they got the rights for Dragon Ball Z, they're making a company, and then like suddenly they have Yu Yu Hakusho, and they got guys like Chris Sabat's Kuwabara, and like a lot of their veterans are like really like taking the show seriously. They're not gonna name Yusuke like Jim. They're not gonna name Hiei like Howard. They're not doing 4Kids bullshit. They're treating this like a serious thing that's coming over here to the West, and we're gonna air it on TV, and kids may watch it, but like it's not exactly a show meant for kids. They were really trying hard with this show to make it everything. There's a couple characters like Jin, the Irish dude, who's like kind of cringy. Even Genkai, who's voiced by the same woman who did Frieza, like she's fine enough as like a character who sounds for that character, but like when there's times that she's supposed to be screaming, you can tell she's like not fully there, which is, you know, understandable. She's like, again, kind of probably out of her element. She's probably not like the go-to actress to play this kind of character. She does sound like, when I hear her and see that character, it does feel natural, but like her all isn't in it, and it wasn't in it for Frieza either, in all honesty. That's why they recasted her. Other reasons obviously, but I love the dub of the show. Even characters like Botan, they nail Botan on the head. Like, it's great. A lot of characters like Senzui, Toguro, Hiei, Keiko. I can't really complain. Like, Keiko is voiced by Laura Bailey. A lot of characters of like the old Funimation team. This is like they've been doing it long enough that they know what to do now, but not like how it is nowadays, where it's just a little bit more saturated and like not as much like care is put into each show, depending on the show. I'm going to talk about the characters now. First, I want to talk about the side characters. I think I talk about enough about Senzui. Again, design is great. I love his attitude, his demeanor, his motivation is crazy. All of the villains of the show. Same thing with like guys like Karasu. Very interesting designs, and they all have these crazy power-ups. And Toguro, like this big macho, like mafia guy, I guess. Like he's very interesting. He's got muscles for days. He's a thick boy. It's a little too shonen-y for some people, I can imagine, seeing this giant, massive ball of muscles. But then you have characters like Koenma. I much prefer like teenage Koenma. When he's in baby form, he's just a little too annoying. When I say like this show like had the side characters doing a lot, he was like the one exception where he just constantly, we cut to him and he's just kind of giving his own take and just being a little annoying. He's being funny. He's rooting like he thinks that his own team is gonna die. He's like whatever. Like he's like, this is my man now. Like all of that's like a little cringy, but for the most part, especially when you get into the Senzui fight and he gets his hands dirty, great character. And this whole pacifier gimmick, like he's fun. Keiko is a really one of the best love interests of that era. Nowadays we have a lot of like the female love interests who kind of get their hands dirty to some extent. Keiko as like just the side character who just happens to love the main character. They had a much more real relationship. They actually like had feelings that weren't just like, I like you, I might like you. Again, Yusuke going through all these different arcs with himself before he's even able to face Keiko. And Keiko is deciding, should I wait for him? Like, what am I doing with my life if I can't even be at your side? Like, I'm just gonna move on. And she just waits on long enough for Yusuke to come home. Again, that's all great. And they're able to use her throughout the story, and like there's little moments where she's able to do things, but for the most part, it's just her and her personality and her supportiveness. But for what it is, she does it. She looks like such a 90s anime side character, though, her design. And then you got like Botan. I love Botan. I think Botan is easy wife material. Like for beginning of the story, she's so like fun and frolicky. A lot of the girls in the show, other than Keiko, have this like really kind of fun, like the world tournament announcer girl. Like they're so fun spirited and cheerful, and Botan especially, because she has like this kind of like fun banter with Yusuke, and she's on the ground getting her hands dirty, like fighting demons at some point. At some point in the story, she's like literally running around the city with a baseball bat fighting demons in like a leather jacket and like 90s like workout pants. It's great. And I love that design. I think that's when I was like, yeah, Botan is waifu material. Bingo! Again, Botan, I love her. Like when you think of other like fairy godmother, like fun goddess character who supports me, she's probably in the top of my list. Again, Genkai. She is a great student relationship with Yusuke. The whole opening arc with her, where it's like we have to be trained by a great sensei, and then she has like this whole mini arc where they have to like get past like this forest, and like there's all these challenges, but only one person can train with her, and she doesn't really care if it's a good person. Like after everything she's gone through, she just doesn't care anymore. But despite all that, she doesn't give in to evil either. She's not an evil character. She could, like Toguro, live young forever and just remain at the like even stronger than ever, but she doesn't. She lives a respectable warrior's life, which is to get old and die. And they have this whole theme and arc about that. Again, heavy themes, real themes. Every character is in their prime at some point, and Genkai just happens to be past her prime. I love her. Carol Martyr, that was her English dub name. And she's like over 70, and she's still like one of the strongest characters in the show during the World Tournament arc. Her death is beautiful, by the way. Like, I don't get like nearly choked up and crying often, especially like in anime. That did it. Genkai's death did that for me. Hiei is one of those like rule of cool characters. Yusuke beats him in like a fluke. Like a lot of his early victories were like flukes and like these happy accidents. Like he's just spunky enough to. He's like Jack Sparrow. He's willing to try something crazy, and sometimes it just happens to pay off. All of that is really fun. I like all of that. But we are left with a slight character progression on his part, because he's kind of just going through the same thing with every arc, where he's like in the background just wiping out whoever he needs to wipe out. He's so fucking fast and speedy, and he usually is just so cool that he gets a lot of W's under his belt. And he's constantly like demeaning Kuwabara and making fun of him, but then like when you see him with his sister, he's so much nicer in comparison. And his relationship with Kurama is really interesting, where they're kind of like these equal, respectable guys. And then Yusuke is like the rival son of a bitch that he hates, but like he's willing, like he knows like he could lose in a fight to Yusuke at the end of the day. His design is also great. His hair is the most anime haircut I've ever seen. It's weird because Kuwabara is the rival character in the show, but he doesn't act like the rival character. And then Hiei is more the stereotypical like Rei Vegeta Sasuke character, like the edgelord side character. He has like weird ass power-ups too, but at the end of the day, it's that Dragon of the Darkness Flame technique. But he is like a bad guy in a lot of senses. He's probably one of the best. He's probably a fan favorite character. This, like, watching it as a kid, I loved Hiei. Watching it this time around though, I love Kurama. Kurama was my boy, man. Not only because like I like the kind of like feminine side to him, and like his patience and everything like that. It wasn't like your usual, side character who's all hot-headed or edgy or whatever else. There's not a lot of characters like Kurama. And then when you get to like his more big power-up side, that's really fun and interesting. When he's turning into like the white fox spirit, and you learn a little bit more about his backstory, like you knew about like, oh, I'm a fox spirit incarnate, but then when you actually like see it and his reborn as a human and all that stuff, but now he's just a pure demon, and he slowly becomes that over time. That's actually really effective arc, and you get a sense that he really does care about what he's doing and what he's fighting for and his family and all of that stuff. He has a purpose for being there, despite being like somewhat of a rando character who happens to be in the fight. My fiance, who was watching the show, like, who's not really into these kinds of anime, she loved Kurama, I think, too, because again, he's a pretty boy with like this like feminine side, and like happens to be like, oh, I'm just as strong as like arguably Hiei or Yusuke, because all these characters are getting so much stronger all at the exact same time, and they're kind of kept. There's not a lot of shows that can do that balance. Anyway, last up, before last character, we got Kuwabara. Again, the comedic relief character, completely necessary to the story. I like Christopher Sabat's take on him. He's a fucking goof. He's a big goof who's just constantly getting his ass whooped. But he'll get his ass whooped because he's fighting for something he believes in or something done like that. And then he'll see the pretty girl in the audience that he's into, who happens to be Hiei's sister, and there's a lot of great jokes with that. But he finds that out, and then suddenly he's super powerful. That's the kind of power-ups we're getting from the show. Like, oh, pretty girl in the audience, I guess I'm strong enough to beat this guy who's beating me to an inch of my life like a second ago. Obviously, his chemistry as Yusuke is great. He's like really fun. Like I'm on his wiki article right now, and there's this great GIF of him doing like this little dance thing in front of Yukina. Is that Hiei's sister's name? Yukina? Yeah. See, this is why I should have done this video like right when I finished the show, because now my brain's already flushing out names. But the Spirit Sword is probably, you think it's gonna be like one of the most boring techniques. Like, it's cool, like, someone gets a sword, but Hiei has a sword. It's kind of just like, oh, okay, you get a sword. But the way they incorporate that is brilliant. Like, there's one, like, when the first time he, like, hits the ground and he's, like, 100 feet in the air with a sword, that's when you start realizing, oh, there's a lot of crazy stuff you could do with this sword. But at the end of the day, Kuwabara's not given as much as I think he could have been. And his design's a little funky. He's got one of those, I don't want to say 90s haircut, but like the biker, Japanese, the giant, I don't know what they call it. Like the giant, it's not a spike. It's like a giant, what do you call that haircut? His isn't as bad. His is just like a little floof right here. I'm talking about like the one guy from Shaman King who's got the big ass haircut. Those guys are crazy. Kuwabara's got a little bit of that. And again, I like whenever they're not in their school uniforms, they're kind of just wearing like normal teenager clothes. And I think like Yusuke and Kuwabara are like 14 or something at the beginning of the show. Yeah, they're 14 at the beginning of the show and 18 at the end. That is fucking wild. And they'll reference that. I'll look at this guy and I'll be like, you're not a 14-year-old. You look like you could be 29. But that's neither here nor there. A lot of the funny goof stuff is with Kuwabara. And whenever the show needs to lighten up, they bring around Kuwabara. Whenever it's like, oh, there's too many demons and depression and all of this stuff, Kuwabara comes around. And Kuwabara has like the heart of gold and like the Captain America, like, I will not back down. I will not I will not negotiate with terrorists. Like, he's probably like the heart and show of the show in a lot of ways. And then you got Yusuke. My original like fandom pop video I was writing for this, the Yu Yu Hakusho, I remember saying Yusuke is kind of like the perfect shonen protagonist. And the reason for that, I think like a lot of shows can only do so much with characters, because you have to have a main character who's a good foil to bounce off of for the other characters. They have to have a good motivation for fighting, and sometimes when you make characters like Goku, like they don't really get to have that great sense of like a home life, and they don't really have like they have to have a purpose for everything. And Yusuke is like one of those characters, like he eventually does have like that reason to like want to be home and do like normal human stuff, where a lot of like other characters don't. At the same time, he's probably the most like relatable shonen protagonist. He's just a kid from a troubled home. He's just a troubled kid. He's a punk kid who like constantly gets diminished, has no real opportunity, and he makes something and becomes the world's savior. For me, that's a lot more like down to earth. It's a lot more natural than like most characters. Again, they kind of throw some of that away with this whole ancestor thing. But for the most part, like this random guy, this random punk kid who happens to, you know, cut school and touches love interest on the ass a little bit, and then he saves a kid, and then suddenly he's a spirit detective. And he has all these other arcs. And when you see him like shirtless, Dark Tournament, blood, he's flicking people off. That's all well and good. And then when you see him by the end of the show, he does get these big power-up thing. It's a little... I don't want to say like I wish they completely would have got rid of his demon form, but I feel like there might have been a better show out there where they just left that whole arc in a different direction. Maybe even like tone it down a little bit. But no, they went for it. They went for big shonen ending. Yusuke is interesting throughout the whole time. Every single fight, I'm not just talking about with Sensui and Toguro, where his mental state is constantly being used for things and constantly progressing the story, or his motivation is always interesting to hear. And he always has fun, but he has fun banter with every guy he fights, and every guy he fights kind of evolves a little bit. Even when he's fighting Jin, even when he's fighting the knife guy, he has really good arcs with those characters. And a lot of other fun things, like there's a lot of fun power-ups in the show. The spirit gun is pretty iconic in anime. And certain things like the cufflinks are really fun. The power-ups that a lot of the villains get that are usually to do with like weird transformations or things like that. They're all incredibly interesting. I love his English voice actor for Yusuke, by the way. But that's Yu Yu Hakusho. 112 episodes. Again, it's one of the most iconic anime in the shonen world. When I think of tournament arcs, I think of Yu Yu Hakusho. When I think of great villains, I think of Yu Yu Hakusho. When I think of that a character gets hit by a car trope, I think of Yu Yu Hakusho. I know a lot of guys who their favorite character is Yusuke, or their favorite anime is Yu Yu Hakusho. And now that I've finally seen it, I can agree. This is the kind of show that I'm probably going to watch in the future, and I want to make a lot of videos about it, but it's like the audience isn't really there for it that often, and I'll see how this video does. Maybe I'll think about it. But so if you like Yu Yu Hakusho and want more Yu Yu Hakusho content, leave comments, leave a like, support this video. do what you can for the community. You're doing this for the community, man. Share my videos to the community. Put my shit on Reddit. Put it on Twitter. Put it on 4chan. Is that how 4chan works? I don't even know. I don't even use 4chan. It's a bunch of porn and shit anyway. But let's close it out, man. Let's do this. Yu Yu Hakusho. I'm gonna give Yu Yu Hakusho a 9 out of 10. Soul badge of approval. Bam. I'd put Yu Yu Hakusho in the Soul Hall of Fame. If I did my 3x3, Yu Yu Hakusho would be on that shit. Iconic. It's incredibly iconic. Everything is constantly like one-upping itself. It only gets better. I don't think I've ever been invested in anime as I was during some of the parts of the show. It does have a lot of nostalgia for me. I think it's one of the more well-aged show from like 92 to what, 95? Jesus Christ. Yeah. For its time, it's beautiful. And completely stylized. This show has so much style. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I've talked about Yu Yu Hakusho for over an hour now, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope me rambling about Yu Yu Hakusho for as long as I did satisfied your need for... If I needed to make a Yu Yu Hakusho video, I think I hopefully delivered. Now I can stop beating myself up for not making this video. Anyway, thank you for watching. It's your boy Soul. As always, there's probably other videos on screen somewhere that hopefully I made. If not, there's a channel link somewhere that has more videos. I have more anime content that you should watch. Like I said, if you want more videos about Yu Yu Hakusho, let me know. I'll make those videos. Anyway, thank you so much. And with that, I leave you.